if you spend time gathering wild carrot seed, Yampah, every day, and you're doing that every day, the geometry of the plant starts to burn into your vision. Every time you close your eyes, that's all you see. That's all you see is that umbel and the seeds. And then if you just keep doing that day after day, you'll start dreaming in plant language. And that's an ancient connection right there. And suddenly the small details become big and aware, and you start learning from the plants directly.
Hey y'all, I'm Kelly Moody and you're listening to the Ground Shots podcast, an audio project exploring our relationship to ecology through conversations and storytelling with farmers, herbalists, craftspeople, naturalists, artists, and more. Hey y'all, it's Kelly. Welcome to the Ground Shots podcast. This episode is part story and part interview from a visit with Michael Ridge of the Walking with Western Wildflowers project. Michael Ridge lives on horseback and he tends wild gardens in the West, and it's not uncommon to find folks who horseback in the West. It's actually sometimes the most practical way to traverse the dynamic and rugged, varied, and often remote landscape. It's not that common, though, to find someone who actually lives with a pack string 12 months out of the year doing what Michael has dedicated his life to. Michael is an interesting mix of rough around the edges, as anyone might be, who has spent a bunch of time living outside on the land, and also extremely organized and intentional about his possessions, ways, and methods of doing things at any moment. He wears long-sleeved, worn linen shirts of light colors, long handmade buckskin pants and moccasins from hides he tanned, and he is usually wearing a large brimmed hat to protect himself from the sun that he has hand-beaded with colors and designs designating the 4 directions. Many of his clothes and possessions are handmade with beading designs on them that he did, and one design he showed me featured a string of coyote faces circling a biscuit root, and his knuckles are tattooed with a string of letters spelling movement. Last summer on my way through, I visited Michael and his partner Amanda at a saddle maker's ranch in Idaho, located in a beautiful, lush highlands way up above the river valley. The nearest town of Kamiah was about 30 minutes away, and we were in Nimipuu or Nez Perce country, which traditionally expanded over hundreds of miles. The current designated Nimipuu reservation is unfortunately only a fraction of their traditional homelands. Our group was welcomed by Cliff and Rhonda, despite not knowing any of us the week before, and they fed us breakfast and dinner, even though we had no expectations of such hospitality, that given that we were all pretty self-sufficient folks used to kind of meeting our own needs. When I got there, we decided that the next day we would go harvest Camas seed and try to gather some plums to make fruit leather and dry seed to replant. So on the other side of the canyon lived the horsepackers Jean and Ronzo, folks who have been living closely with the land for most of their lives, and they invited us to come and visit and harvest Camas seed actually from the meadow that stretched out in front of their cabin. Cliff and Rhonda graciously offered to let us borrow their open-air Jeep to cross over the canyon below to the other side on a back road crossing through private land, and my truck would have been too tall and top-heavy for the roads we traversed. Amanda's car would have likely been too low for the ground, and the quality of the rocks on the road would have been too much for Michael's horses. This journey out was exciting and sometimes confusing. We crossed a river over an old wooden bridge, traversed many washouts and switchbacks, and when we got to the other side of the canyon, which opened up into a series of immense clear-cuts, we took a wrong turn, and we decided to ignore no trespassing signs. Michael seems to have a knack for talking to strangers and being straightforward about what we're trying to do and who we're trying to go visit, and the folks we rolled up onto decided to help us get to Jean and Ronzo's place, which was only a few miles away. We arrived to their place with welcome arms and immediate kinship. Jean and Ronzo's place was beautifully hand-built, tucked at the edge of the woods next to tall cedars and quaking aspen. Jean is an amazing quill worker and has even written a book about it. She also has been tanning hides for decades and pulled out some recent hides she has tanned. The smell of fresh smoke filled the house. And their home was filled with handmade things, hides, beautiful parfleche artwork made from natural pigment and skins, jars of herbs, preserved foods, cast iron pans hung all over the walls. We decided to go out and gather camas seeds in the several acre-sized meadow in front of their place, while Jean and Ronzo made a salad for our lunch and dug out some homemade pear rhubarb wine. Here's a little snippet from our field harvesting that day, where Michael speaks a little bit about camas, which is an important first foods plant that thrives from human interaction and tending in the wild.
I shared this online. There's Camasia quamash that is actually camas. And it's the same camas. And a lot of the variants in colors are more sensitive, and so they're going away pretty quick.
Oh, interesting.
And so when you find white camas, you know that's a rarity. It's not death camas, you know.
Yeah.
Knowing the difference is pretty important, but they're pretty obvious when you do.
Yeah.
When you do know the difference.
But so what is the white camas? It's rare. So do you try to get seeds from things like that to replant
Absolutely.
so that you can keep those varieties going?
Yeah, if it's around, there's no way to tell here right now. It all looks the same, you know. There's no actual difference. Just the flower is different. It's the same species of camas. It's just those color variances are so much more sensitive. But you know, like with the shooting stars, there's white shooting stars, purple, pink, blue, you know, and you just don't see it as often. And some of the places that are more abundant and have also abundance of variation, which is cool to see.
What would make the one in Hells Canyon not edible? You said it's just more. Is it more?
It's just a different species. I don't know. I don't know much about it, you know, but I do know it wasn't traditionally eaten.
But the one we're harvesting is likely a blue camas, which was and is traditionally eaten, right?
Yep. Yeah, and now is a really good time to dig camas for eating.
Yeah.
Right? Typically with all the roots, you wait till they're seeding, you dig them, and you're planting as you're digging, and so that's a special time. So it's time. And I wish I brought my digging stick too. You know, as soon as camas is blooming, it's like, oh yeah, it's time to dig camas. But when you want to harvest and gather for the entire year, it's when it's seeding.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want to just attack something before it's like in its time. The only thing that encourages camas to grow more is the disturbance in the soil. You know, all these seeds, they need to find shade from the sun, and they need the soil.
But then, yeah, you have to.
So it is the interaction, and there's not much interaction you can have with camas besides digging it and gathering the seed. But it's nice to plant the seed too as you're gathering it.
I like to think about like the human. We drank some rhubarb wine with our lunch, and the longer we hung out sharing stories, the darker the clouds got. Soon it started raining, and thunder and lightning loomed overhead. We needed to get back, so we jumped in the Jeep, and I was the driver this time. We drove back in the pouring rain, a thunderstorm overhead. The Jeep was open air with only a thin piece of canvas covering our heads. We got wet, but our seeds were tucked down in a drier place in the Jeep, and water poured off the earth, ran in quick creeks across the back roads. It's pretty unusual to get rain like this in the summer around this part of Idaho, but we had actually had days of this kind of weather last summer leading up to my visit with Michael and Amanda. The next day, we went out to pick cherry plums down in the valley, a variety that Michael says grows only in a specific region in the West, but has a lot of varieties and fruits, different colors. We also gathered blue elderberries and chokecherries. A thunderstorm got us again, so we headed back up to Cliff and Rhonda's place to start processing the plums to make fruit leather and to save the seed to replant. Processing the plums to save seed required squeezing them through good quality cheesecloth, forcing the juice and micropulp through, setting aside the skins and seeds to be separated later. While we processed, we chatted a little bit about Michael's work while tending and living on horseback.
I've never been to college for botany. I'm not a botanist. I'm not illegal in any kind of that way. And I think what builds my credibility over the years is consistency and maintaining that and persistent in it. And it feels like year after year, people are wondering if I'm still going to be out there roaming on horseback. And I get that.
Like if you'll be over it and move on to some other thing or something like that.
I don't know what else I would do.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't even picture it. Get bored in a home. It's not a life.
Yeah.
It's not a real life. One of the things that I maintain consistency with is encouraging people to come out and participate with the ecosystem and share and learn what they know and what everybody else learns on a mutual basis, not a monetary basis. And a lot of people will be like, okay, well, if it's free, then it has no value. And that is so far from the truth. You know, when I think about what it is to be able to provide food for yourself in the wild and being able to feed yourself and knowing how to do it and how to process all these mass varieties of food, that's food freedom. Food freedom that still exists abundantly in the West. And right here, you know, it's remnants all up and down from Canada to Mexico. It's just remnants, but the remnants are largely abundant, and it is just mind-blowing how big these gardens are as you move across the land. And, you know, there are dead zones, and anywhere a valley or a town is or was is not doing so good. But out in between and all those forgotten places is places where you can live. And it's a broken hoop, so to speak. There's no more buffalo, and the salmon aren't doing so well, but there is food freedom still. And while that exists, I think it's important to participate with it. And full circle participation is harvesting and planting, you know. Yeah. And I say that all the time. You can harvest seed and plant the seed, but it's not a relationship unless you're also enjoying that food. And you can harvest food, but it's not a full relationship if you're not planting the seed. And so where you find your balance is in the living, breathing flow of creation. And that's where it is. And I have to stress how trial and error was not the case. It wasn't at all. And the more time you spend out in nature, the more that becomes obvious. And the clearest way I can explain that is the patterns of each plant. And that's their language. Same with the patterns of animals. And you spend enough time out here, the subtleties become large and obvious. And then it goes from there, you know, it expands from there. And then you notice even more subtle things. Like down in the desert, oh, well, there's 3 types of juniper right here, you know, and the differences are very subtle. Mm-hmm. And the variations of each plant and where they like to grow in each of their zones. And that's the relationship that's coming through right there. And, you know, if you spend time gathering wild carrot seed, Yampah, every day, and you're doing that every day, the geometry of the plant starts to burn into your vision. Every time you close your eyes, that's all you see. That's all you see is that umbel and the seeds. And then if you just keep doing that day after day, you'll start dreaming in plant language. And that's an ancient connection right there. And suddenly the small details become big and aware. And you know, you start learning from the plants directly. And that's my experience, you know. I was going along picking shooting star blossoms in the early spring. And, I was just plucking them off the stem, and I would walk around, pluck, 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 pluck. Mm-hmm. And then one day I was just sitting with the shooting stars, admiring them and looking at them and feeling them. And then, my hand raised up and grabbed the little beak of the shooting star, and it slipped off, and I could see, wow, the flower petal just slipped off, and it left the seed pod there to develop still.
Whoa.
And just slowing down, just that act of slowing down, the shooting star revealed to me, no, you can have your salad and I can still make seed. And, before, when I was just gathering the stems, I was tossing them out when it came time to eat the salad because they're all fibery and hard. And so, what I was doing was kind of like, me, mine. Mm-hmm. And it's just that act of slowing down. And that's what you get. That's what you get when you go from 60 miles an hour to 3 miles an hour on horseback. Mm-hmm. You slow down. You get to know the land very well. You start memorizing each rock and each tree and then go as far as to name them. Sometimes that's fun. There's so much to learn just from watching a tree blowing in the wind. And, it can sound a little hippy dippy and crazy, but there's a truth to it that goes beyond harvesting. That participation, that interaction, it's an ancient relationship. And another issue people have is, well, do we belong here on this continent? And, I tell everybody all the time, most people are Russian and I'm Roman. You do as the Romans do. You participate with the land in the way that was sustainable here in the indigenous ways for thousands and thousands of years beyond the 500 or 600 year mark that we've been here. And they've been here for a very long time, longer than science says we've been here, longer than archaeology says that people have been here. And I think what makes us belong is that participation in the ecosystem. Are you participating and playing a role in what's here, or are you just doing your thing on top of foreign land? And that is the remarkable difference right there. That is the contrast. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes you belong. So people feel like they don't belong. Well, if you took time in one area, you would feel like you do belong, because it's that relationship building. And a lot of people move around uncertain of where they belong, trying to find their niche and place. Well, it takes the time to rest in a place and get to know a place to actually become a part of that place. And me, as somebody that roams across the West on horseback, I make it my home everywhere I go. And I love that flexibility of mind and body to be able to provide and move across the land and have that space for yourself and be able to hold that down for yourself. And so you feel comfortable everywhere you go. You know how to move in all the turmoil and all the blessings. It's a special, adaptable way. Being able to move in consistent change like the seasons. You become the seasons. The season within seasons. And when the seed is ripe, that's the season of seed sons.
Mm-hmm. The season of fruit. Seems like that's what we're in right now.
Yeah. And I love that. They say there's 4 seasons, but everywhere you go, the seasons are slightly different. The plants are different. The animals are slightly different. And the seasons just keep going year after year. And so it takes as many times as you need to figure out what's going on. Yeah.
What do you call the winter season?
That's winter cramp. Winter cramp, because you're coming off of 6 months of horseback travel and you're needing a break and your animals are needing a break and you feel like a winter, and then I'm cramped inside of a teepee for 6 months, and so that's winter cramp to a T. And
got lots of activities inside the teepee to keep yourself busy for the winter.
Every day. And I always feel good about my winters when I'm learning something new. And so as long as I'm learning something new through my years, I feel like I'm moving forward in my goals. But the ultimate goal is to turn wild tending into wild trending. and encourage people to participate with the land in a more fruitful way for both sides of it. And that is so important. One of the techniques using with horses is, when you contain your horses the way I do, they create dead zones. They can't go anywhere. Most generally, when horses are loose, they're going to be very easy on the land because they're just grazing, and they move, and they can move 20 miles in a day without even realizing it, just gently, because they're just walking and eating. But when I contain them, they're on a circle, and they can go round and around and go back and forth, and they paw and they roll, and they create bare ground, and that could be a bad thing. And a lot of the way the outfitters contain their horses is on a high line, and a lot of the trees roots get pawed up and expose them, and they die, and that can be pretty bad too. And a way to cope with that is to reintroduce natives, and you can deliberately tie out your horses on places where there's just what people call weeds, or just there's a lot of annual grasses out here like cheatgrass or medusa head and foxtail, things that have really taken over the land and taken the advantage over the natives. And you can create these spots where you can basically kill it, uproot all of those, and make a dead zone right there, and plant the natives thick and give them a place to reclaim with no competition. And then if you're in a good spot, you're cleaning up all the dead wood and all the dead limbs off the trees. And if you're in a camp for 2 weeks, pretty soon you're walking pretty far to find firewood. And you clean up the forest, and every berry bush you see, you make clones of it, by burying their wands. And there's all these different techniques to implement in just casual camping that have the land thriving, especially if you're out mushroom harvesting. And I don't do those circle rock fire pits. I don't. So I like to have a fire in my shelter, so I dig a trench and pull out that sod in whole chunks. And after I've had my fire and I'm moving camp, I put that sod back, and you can't even tell that there was a fire there. And another thing if it's mushroom season, I recommend laundry netted bags, because you gather mushrooms into that. The spores are following out as you're moving across the land, and you can deliberately spore your fire trench, and then, they'll come right out of it. And such subtle little techniques that need to be made popular. Yeah.
Pruning and stuff too, cutting back certain things that...
One thing that was made aware to me years ago was the fact that they call recreation, and it's pronounced it's spelled recreation and pronounced recreation, and that says a lot. It's a very subtle and says so much about a relationship and everything.
Wrecking things.
Yeah. Well, it's like you come out and people are having a good old time on jet skis, or side by sides and four wheelers, and it's just they're getting pretty popular, and it's hard to see the wildlife when you're screaming down the road on a four wheeler, and they all run away, and you don't get to enjoy much. You just get to see a naked forest, quiet forest.
You feel like the horses don't scare away things quite as much.
They sure don't.
Yeah.
If you could see how many of the bears and the wild cats and all the critters you get to see on horses, and the deer and the elk, and they're more curious when you're on horses and instead of fearful. But once they see a string of horses, that's pretty freaky.
Yeah. Totally.
All the jingle jangle.
Mm-hmm.
But I see a lot of bears. And then there's a lot of issue, especially with the Forest Service, about moving seed around. So one of the things that I've been doing is allowing the wild foods to cross-pollinate with each other. There's over 200 varieties of wild carrot, Yampah. And so I've been taking these 3 varieties very specifically. There's Paradidia oregana and Bolandary, and then the coastal Yampah out in California and Oregon. I'm not sure exactly what that one's called. And planting them together in every variation possible in different locations. So if you have 3 varieties of Yampah seed, well, then you have 4 combinations you can do total. You can do 2 of each variation together, and then you can do all 3 together. And what you're doing there is allowing those plants to have that option of diversifying their genetics. We're not largely in charge of that, but by planting it in every possible variation there could be, you get to see what they're doing, the choices that they are making, and each one has a different carrot underground. Tops are indiscernible, largely. And so making those genetics available for diversification, biodiversity, that is important. That's important work with the changing ecosystem, with less water, more UV, and you're making that available for them to actually have a chance to move on into the future, which has been done for time immemorial.
Like sunchokes, one of those examples, right? Is that one out here very much? Sunchokes? I guess it's maybe more of an East Coast thing. There's so many varieties, and it's basically evidence that indigenous peoples have been tending them in that way.
Exactly. And as you move across the land, you see that in all the lilies and all the roots and everything. You see the variance. You see the slight changes and how these specific roots have such a massive range. But as you move across the land, it goes slightly different. And then there's all these subspecies, and especially like Sego Lily is a good one because there's so many subspecies, and you see the same one in the large areas, and then you get into a new area where it's kind of a specialty pocket and they're endemic to that area, but they're on these zones, and these zones blend with each other. But I swear you can't go anywhere in the West without running into a new variety of Sego Lily, and then some of the same ones, and it's been done forever. And a lot of the Forest Service and BLM, they're against it. They want it to be illegal. Well, it's not illegal. It is gray area. It's not illegal at all, but they
carry seeds and plant them places.
Right. It's been done for a very long time. And what gives me my permission to do this work is when we were honored at the Wallowa Powwow. And so we had 2 Army duffel bags full of seed, 100 pounds of seed, all varieties of Biscuitroots and plums, and just the native stone fruit. And when the grandmother there at the powwow stood and held our seed bundle and looks at me and looks at the seed and says, "Keep doing this," and that's all the permission I need right there. The voice that's been the voice of this land for generations. That's it. That's it. I don't look for permission anywhere else. That was powerful.
Were y'all bringing seeds as like to offer them?
We were bringing them as showbread, showing them what we're doing, why we're doing it. And we actually brought in Camas, which is a native breadroot. It's a Lomatium Camas, and we like to call it Bisquick because it's just a ball root, shallow in the ground, and you pop it out, and it's really fast food. Bisquick. There's other fast foods too, like the Big Macs, which is Lomatium macrocarpum. Macrocarpum means large fruiting, so it's Big Mac. And then sausage biscuits, they have linking roots. They'll have a bread root that goes down thin to a stem again, and then another bread root, and they can do that 3 or 4 times that I've seen. And so these are our fast food. So we got Bisquicks and Big Macs and sausage biscuits. I love that. And the common names for a lot of these wild foods are interchangeable. So like Camas could be wild hyacinth, and then Brodias could be wild hyacinth.
Say osha with that too. Some Lomatiums are called oshas, and some ligusticums are called oshas.
So I love that we can come up with these common names that are specific to each plant, and that is pretty neat, and it's less confusing that way. I don't like all the confusion around these native foods. It's dangerous.
Especially the carrot family, Lomatiums and Yampah, right?
Yeah, and we call Yampah dirt candy, and it's very sweet.
Tasty. Yeah. And some of the Yampahs are more food than others, right? Because of the size of the root or something like that. And I guess same with the biscuit roots that you were just talking about.
Yeah, there's all kinds. There are. Most of the Yampas around here, they are food. Mm-hmm. You know. But the coastal Yampa, it doesn't really have a carrot that's like carrot. But it's still got
something. It's
still got the genetics of that wet coastal lands that it has something to offer. Mm-hmm. It surely does. And it's good salad green. It's so reassuring that it's actually very difficult to share and get the point across of how soul feeding and physically and mentally feeding this work is. It is that time between you and the plants. It's your hands in the dirt. It's you tasting the food and eating it and making meals of it and then planting the seed and seeing your seed germinate and grow into something that is going to feed the future. It is all of it that is the reassurance that is lacking in just, typical interest and getting other people interested in participating. And so there's a gap there that I've filled for myself, and I don't question it, but it is difficult for others to get it fully without that interaction. And so that is the trick there, to encourage and inspire people to go as far as they can with it. And it actually requires a bit of energy and learning. And it's I think of it like learning guitar. It's not fun learning guitar. You don't like it. It doesn't sound good. Nobody else likes it because it doesn't sound good. And it's very discouraging to get going. And it takes that determination and now after a while you could just pick up a guitar and start playing, and that's a freedom that wasn't there before. And so when I first started this, traveling on horses, packing them, riding them, training them, and then learning the foods and each one of their names and what they look like through the seasons. I mean, you're not good at anything, and it's just not fun. And you have to stick that out. You have to stick through it. And not only that, but the deeper side and the more difficult side of committing yourself in such an abnormal way to horseback nomadicism, tending these wild food gardens, is the mental aspect. Because so much of our ways do not work in the natural world. And it's as simple as people coming out to visit that sleep until noon. Well, I can't do that personally. Come summertime, I'm getting up at 4 a.m. and I'm on the road by 6, because when that sun comes up, my horses are the ones carrying that load, packing it in the heat and all of that intensity. And if I were to just wait until it's the hottest part of the day to travel, well, that's just not sustainable for me or my animals, and it's miserable. And so simple things like that, there's all these self-defeating ways that we have to come out of, and that is just a basic one, sleeping in. That's not something that you can do sustainably and keep everybody happy and strong, and it'll just degrade everybody over time. And there's a lot of those ways, and there's a lot of learning, and each aspect of learning has its own learning curve where something in that learning curve suffers. And if you're not learning by making your mistakes, well, then you're going to make them over and over again, which is, again, not sustainable. And so it's really a sink or swim kind of aspect that I went through, and I'm still here by myself, going through vast wilderness by myself, with going in and out of cell phone signal, go long periods of time without cell phone signal, and not a lot of people know that I'm okay. But I feel confident and comfortable in that because of all the learning that I have gone through. And if you look up freedom to roam, it'll say horse travel is the number one before vehicle travel, and everybody has the right to transport themselves and their belongings either by horseback or vehicle. And included in that, naturally with horses, is a layover spot. See, I can only go so far.
Well, it's not that long ago that was pretty normal.
Yeah. And like I'm saying, I can only go so far in a day before I need to take a rest. I I can't just ride my animals till they can't go no more, or can't go the next day and they need to take a break. There's so many dynamics and circumstances that have to be taken into account and most laws and ordinances are generalizations meant for the general public that do apply to them most generally, but not to my circumstances. And so I found as long as I can explain that clear enough, they're very understanding. And so, what the sergeant wanted me to do was go miles beyond my limit, to camp miles beyond town. And then I can't ride my horses back miles because they need to take a break from traveling. So I'd have to walk miles back into town and walk miles all around town to gather my groceries and go to the shops I needed to. And then I'd have to walk miles back after already doing a full day of traveling myself. And so I explained that to him, and it's just not an option for me. So this is what I'm going to do. And that's why. And so when you look up freedom to roam, it's actually in the Constitution, and it says specifically, you can Google it, freedom to roam, and it says right there, no town or city has the right to regulate that at will. So their ordinances mean nothing.
And you bring that up on the phone and they're like, well.
It's just how it is. I don't even have to bring it up, and they should know it. They should know it's not my job to educate the law enforcement.
Yeah.
But we've come to a place in time in our current reality where, it's just assumable that everything is illegal. And especially planting back and moving these wild seeds around, which has been done for thousands and thousands of years, largely left undone, which is needed now more than ever. So I have the confidence to keep myself and my animals in a good way. That doesn't mean accidents don't happen, but you can minimize them. And probably the worst accidents I have now is just my horses all getting away and running down the trail without me, miles. They can go a long way when they're all loose, and that sucks. It's happened a couple times this year.
Yeah.
But no more am I having packs that are falling off the horses, and the horses are rolling down cliffs, and you got to pick your stuff out of 200-foot canyons while it's raining. No more is that the case, and I just couldn't be happier for that. And you learn to not leave any loose ends. And that can be applied in every sense, in everything that we do, and everything everybody does. You do it right the first time, and you double check, and you make sure that everything is done neat, prim, and proper. You can see how everybody interacts with everything, because it's all relationship and it's all tending. So I can't have busted gear and leave it busted and just go down the road. I have to tend to everything right away, and you can't leave any kinds of loose ends. Horses make everything more extreme in the accidents, and it costs a lot more energy. It costs a lot more energy to make mistakes.
They're living beings. They are your companions, and you help each other.
It teaches you to operate in a very good way, and no matter what you're doing.
When I left Cliff and Rhonda's, the storms were passing and the sun coming out, the air warming to more normal summer temperatures, and I made syrup out of my chokecherries and elderberries and took extra plums to process. Once I got to my friend Aaron's place in Oregon a few days later, I transferred my Camas seeds into a paper bag, intending to plant them at a later date, and actually since then I have planted some of that seed in wet meadows across Nevada. There's a lot of ways that wild tending can look, but Michael's way of full-time dedication, full immersion in the wild, to listen to the depths of what the plants and the land have to reveal sticks with me after this visit with him in Idaho. I know that the human place in ecology is to participate by eating from and tending the land intimately, planting seeds, noticing nuances seasonally, and I often find myself personally in between worlds, living outdoors or in my camper most of the year, and spending a lot of time too being on the land, watching or engaging in some way. Yet my work interfaces with the digital or so-called Babylon too. I realize more over time that modern technologies can be used as tools to educate and communicate ideas. Often now, too, even root digging sticks are made of metal instead of wood, yet their helpfulness is the same, and the stick will last a very long time. All this said, I know not everyone can do what Michael does in the way that he does it, but tending, planting back, and engaging the land is actually accessible to anyone, anywhere. But we can make choices every day to work with what we have as best we can. It's our duty, actually, a responsibility that we must uphold for future life on this earth. Actually doing the work, spending the time, learning, engaging, tending, planting seeds, watching, and stepping out of the capitalist framework that our labor must be monetized all the time is one big step. Hey y'all, you just listened to a conversation with Michael Ridge of Walking with Western Wildflowers, and I hope this series thus far on the podcast on wild tending has inspired folks to think about the places and lands where they live and how they can be better stewards of those places. And as always, too, it's important to educate ourselves on whose native lands we tend, live, or move on in the colonial histories of those places. The music snippets in this episode are from Michael Ridge himself playing guitar by the fire, and these recordings were done for the podcast last summer. And now Amanda, Michael's bird-savvy partner, travels with him full-time. You can find them both on Instagram at Walking with Western Wildflowers and at mountain.manders. And I'll link both their Facebooks and Instagram accounts in the show notes so you can check out what they're doing, pictures of the plants and their travels on horseback. And I'll also include links to ways you can support their work. You can find a few photos from my visit with Michael and Amanda last summer on the blog post for this episode, and I'll link that in the show notes. And if I ever get to spend more time with Michael and Amanda, I'd love to interview or feature Amanda more because she is pretty wonderful and also knows so much about birds. It's sweet to meet her and get to know her a little bit. I also want to thank Gabe Crawford for helping me out a little bit with the edits for this episode. I do a lot of editing work before I send it off to Heather with Opia Creative, and he helped me kind of sort out mixing some of this audio together. So thanks, Gabe. Take care, y'all, and thank you so much for listening. Until next time. This episode of the Ground Shots podcast was produced by Opia Creative. Our music is by Mother Marrow. If you'd like to help us continue to make this audio project a reality, consider becoming a monthly supporter on our Patreon page at patreon.com/ofsedgeandsalt, where we have rewards like entry into patron-only giveaways, additional audio interviews, extra educational content, and much more. You can also share our work and give us a review on iTunes. Visit our website at ofsedgeandsalt.com to see what else we're up to and a log of our episodes when they come out. Check out our show notes for information about how to find us and our guests. Until next time, y'all, thanks for listening.